The Ghost Army was 1,100 artists, actors, and radio operators who impersonated entire divisions of the U.S. Army using inflatable tanks, sound recordings, and elaborate deceptions to confuse the entire Nazi war machine. Officially designated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, they carried out more than 20 separate deception operations across the European theater between 1944 and 1945. Their work was classified for more than 50 years after the war ended, so thoroughly that many of the men who served couldn't tell their own wives what they had actually done in Europe. Among their members, fashion designer Bill Blass, abstract painter Ellsworth Kelly, and wildlife illustrator Arthur Singer. They were genuinely an army of artists, and their average IQ of 119 made them one of the most intellectually formidable units in the entire Allied order of battle. They fired almost no shots and are credited by historians with saving thousands of Allied lives using little more than rubber, paint, sound recordings, and imagination in place of tanks and artillery. In 1944, the U.S. Army created a unit unlike any that had existed before in American military history. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, formally organized in January and deployed to Europe that May, under the command of Colonel Harry L. Reeder. The unit's mission was strategic deception. Rather than winning battles directly through firepower, they would make the Germans believe the wrong things: wrong troop positions, wrong attack directions, wrong unit strengths, by constructing an elaborate multi-dimensional illusion of a military force that, in reality, wasn't there at all. To do this, they recruited specifically and unconventionally. Artists who understood visual camouflage and had the training to construct convincing false environments, many drawn from art schools like Pratt Institute and the Art Students League of New York. Sound engineers who could record and rebroadcast the sounds of entire armored divisions moving through terrain. Radio operators skilled enough to convincingly impersonate the specific transmission habits of other real Army units. Actors capable of wearing different rank insignia and playing different roles convincingly in different towns on consecutive days. The unit's average IQ of 119 was exceptionally high for a military unit of the period, well above the Army average. They attracted the kind of person who was inventive, adaptable, and entirely comfortable with ambiguity. Qualities that would have been nearly useless in a conventional infantry assignment, but were absolutely essential for the strange work they were being asked to do. The Ghost Army's toolkit had 4 interlocking components. The first was visual deception: inflatable rubber tanks, artillery pieces, trucks, and even aircraft, some manufactured to specifications the unit itself helped develop. Inflated with air compressors and positioned correctly in fields and tree lines, they were genuinely indistinguishable from the real thing at typical aerial reconnaissance distance. A 4-man crew could inflate a fake Sherman tank in under 30 minutes, and the entire prop could be deflated and packed into a single duffel bag for transport. The second was sonic deception. Sound trucks equipped with powerful speakers mounted on half-tracks that could broadcast pre-recorded sounds. Armor moving, engineers building pontoon bridges, supply convoys idling, at volumes loud enough to be heard from as far as 15 miles away on a still night. The recordings were made using the U.S. Army's actual equipment on training grounds, so German intelligence monitoring them heard exactly what real armored movement genuinely sounded like. The third was radio deception. Operators who could impersonate the specific radio signatures, the transmission rhythms, the message formats, even the individual sending style of particular operators belonging to real divisions. When the Ghost Army was pretending to be the 2nd Armored Division, their radio operators sent traffic that sounded to German listening posts exactly like the 2nd Armored. The fourth was theatrical deception. Soldiers wearing the right insignia, driving the right vehicles through the right towns, and having the right loud, careless conversations in local bars with precisely the wrong information for any German agents who happened to be listening. Their most significant single operation was Operation Viersen, conducted in March 1945 as the Allies prepared for the final push across the Rhine River into the German heartland. The actual crossing was to be conducted by the Ninth Army at a location the Germans did not know. The Ghost Army was tasked with convincing the Germans that the crossing would instead happen roughly 30 miles to the south, convincingly enough that German forces would reposition themselves to defend entirely the wrong stretch of riverbank. They inflated rubber landing craft along the southern section of the Rhine. They broadcast the sounds of bridging equipment and engineering activity through the night. Their radio operators ran a complete sustained impersonation of 2 full corps headquarters, generating days of realistic traffic. Their artists constructed camouflage and staging areas that, examined from the air, showed precisely the activity patterns of a major river crossing operation being prepared. Vehicle tracks, supply dumps, and all. When the actual Rhine crossing began on the night of March 23rd, German forces were significantly concentrated at the decoy site to the south. The real crossing, further north, faced meaningfully lighter opposition than it almost certainly would have encountered otherwise. The crossing succeeded within days. Germany's last major defensive line in the west was breached for good. Military historians have since argued that Operation Viersen may have saved thousands of Allied casualties and shortened the European war by weeks. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were classified immediately after the war ended and remained classified for the next 50 years. The men who served in it, Bill Blass, who became one of America's most celebrated fashion designers, Ellsworth Kelly, who became one of the defining figures of post-war American abstract painting, Arthur Singer, who became a celebrated wildlife illustrator whose bird paintings appeared on U.S. postage stamps, and hundreds of others who went on to careers in advertising, architecture, and design, were forbidden by their security oaths from discussing any of it, even decades later. They came home and quietly built careers in art, design, radio, and entertainment. They went to cocktail parties with fellow veterans and couldn't explain what they had actually done during the war. Some of them carried sketchbooks they had filled while stationed in France and Germany, drawings of the towns they had passed through, studies for the deceptions they had run, and for decades couldn't explain to family members where or why they had made them. The program was finally declassified in 1996. The surviving men, by then in their 70s and 80s, began giving interviews for the first time, finally able to describe the second, secret life they had led inside a war the public had followed closely, but had never seen this particular part of. In 2022, the United States Congress unanimously awarded the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, the nation's highest civilian honor, though by then only a small handful of the original 1,100 members were still alive to see it. 1,100 artists, designers, and radio operators effectively ran a traveling theater company that performed continuously for German military intelligence across the European theater for the better part of a year. Their shows were good enough that they may genuinely have changed the outcome of the war, or at least the cost of winning it. The U.S. Army that defeated Germany with fake tanks and movie magic. They inflated rubber tanks by the hundreds. They broadcast recordings of armored divisions into the dark European countryside night after night. They wore the wrong insignia in the right bars and said exactly the wrong things to exactly the right listeners. And they did it all so convincingly that it took 50 full years before anyone outside the unit itself was allowed to know any of it had happened. Bill Blass went on to dress the women of America. Ellsworth Kelly went on to help redefine American painting. And before any of that, working with rubber, sound trucks, and radio sets, they made the German army look in exactly the wrong direction, again and again, for a year. Subscribe if you want more. See you in the next one.